The autumn of 1887 brought more than just changing leaves to the Broken Arrow Ranch. It brought desperate choices and unexpected salvation to two souls who thought they had lost everything worth living for. Jacob "Iron" Sullivan had been running his cattle operation single-handedly since his wife Martha died in childbirth 18 months earlier, leaving him with 4 sons ranging from ages 3 to 12, and a ranch that demanded more hours than any single man could give. At 36, Iron's massive frame bore the marks of countless hard seasons, rope burns on his hands, sun lines around his eyes, and the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from carrying responsibilities too heavy for one pair of shoulders. His boys were growing wild without their mother's gentle influence. 12-year-old James had become sullen and angry, taking out his grief by bullying his younger brothers and challenging his father's authority at every turn. 10-year-old Samuel was retreating into books and solitude, spending more time in the hayloft reading than helping with ranch work. 8-year-old Thomas had developed a stutter that got worse whenever anyone raised their voice, while 3-year-old Benjamin cried constantly for the mama who would never come home. Iron knew his sons needed more than he could give them. They needed stability, nurturing, the kind of patient guidance that came naturally to women, but seemed to slip through his work-roughened fingers like water. But finding a woman willing to take on a widowed rancher and his 4 grieving children in the harsh Wyoming territory seemed about as likely as finding gold in his water trough. That's when fate brought Clara Henderson stumbling into his barn, half dead from hunger and carrying secrets that would reshape all their lives. Iron discovered her on a cold October morning while doing his routine check of the livestock. At first, he thought the bundle of rags huddled in the corner stall was just debris blown in by the previous night's windstorm. But as he moved closer, the bundle stirred and revealed itself to be a young woman so thin her clothes hung like sackcloth on a scarecrow frame. She couldn't have been more than 25, with honey-blonde hair that had been chopped short and uneven, as if cut with a dull knife in desperate haste. Her dress was quality fabric, but torn and stained beyond repair, and her feet were wrapped in strips of cloth instead of proper shoes. Most striking of all were her eyes, pale blue and filled with the kind of wariness that spoke of recent trauma and hard-learned survival instincts. When she saw Iron approaching, she pressed herself against the barn wall as if she could disappear into the wood itself. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of shifting hay. "I know I'm trespassing. I just needed shelter for one night. I'll leave right now if you want." Iron held up his hands in a gesture of peace, recognizing the signs of someone who had been hurt badly and recently. "Easy there, miss. Nobody's going to hurt you here. When's the last time you ate something?" The question seemed to break something inside her. Clara's composure crumbled as she admitted she hadn't had a real meal in 5 days, surviving on wild berries and water from streams as she fled across 3 territories from something she refused to name. But the most shocking revelation came when Iron's 4 sons appeared in the barn doorway. "Pa, who's that?" little Benjamin asked, peering around his oldest brother's legs with the curiosity of a child who had never learned to fear strangers. Clara's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Instead of the fear or discomfort most adults showed around Iron's boisterous boys, her face lit up with a joy so genuine it transformed her entirely. She dropped to her knees in the hay, bringing herself to Benjamin's eye level. "Hello there," she said softly, her voice warm despite her obvious exhaustion. "I'm Clara. What's your name?" "Benjamin Sullivan," the 3-year-old replied proudly. "That's my pa, and those are my big brothers. We live here with all the cows." Clara smiled, the first genuine smile Iron had seen from her, and looked up at the older boys. "It's very nice to meet all of you. You have a beautiful ranch here." James, the 12-year-old who had become suspicious of all adults since his mother's death, studied Clara with narrowed eyes. "Are you another one of those women Pa's been talking to in town? The ones who want to marry him for his money?" "James," Iron said sharply, embarrassed by his son's bluntness. But Clara just laughed, a sound like silver bells that seemed to brighten the entire barn. "Oh my, no. I don't have any interest in marriage or money. I'm just a traveler who got caught in yesterday's storm and needed a dry place to sleep." Something in her tone convinced James that she was telling the truth. His defensive posture relaxed slightly as he asked, "Where are you traveling to?" Clara's expression clouded over. "I'm not sure yet. Somewhere far away from where I came from." And that's when everything began to change. Iron made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of sending Clara on her way after a meal and some supplies, which would have been the sensible, cautious thing to do, he found himself saying, "Why don't you stay for a few days? Until you figure out where you're headed. We've got a spare room and you look like you could use some proper rest and regular meals." Clara's eyes widened in shock. "I couldn't impose on your family like that. You don't know anything about me." "I know you're in trouble and need help," Iron replied simply. "I know you're the first adult my boys have smiled at in months." Sometimes that's enough to go on. Over the next week, Clara's presence began to work magic on the Sullivan household. She didn't try to replace the boys' mother or impose herself as a disciplinarian. Instead, she simply offered what they needed most: patient attention, gentle guidance, and the kind of nurturing presence that had been missing from their lives for too long. She helped Thomas with his stuttering by reading aloud with him every evening, never showing impatience when he stumbled over words. She drew Samuel out of his shell by asking about the books he read, engaging him in conversations about stories and ideas that made his eyes light up with intelligence. She channeled James's anger into productive work around the ranch, treating him like the young man he was becoming rather than the child he no longer wanted to be. Most importantly, she gave little Benjamin the maternal attention he craved, braiding his hair in the mornings, singing lullabies at bedtime, and answering his endless questions with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed the company of children. But it was Clara's effect on Iron himself that proved most transformative. But you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. For the first time since Martha's death, Iron found himself looking forward to coming home at the end of each long day. Clara had a gift for creating peace in the chaos of raising 4 boys alone, not by imposing strict rules, but by bringing a sense of order and warmth that made their house feel like a home again. She was an excellent cook, turning their simple fare of beans and beef into meals that actually tasted good. She mended their clothes with neat, tiny stitches that would last through hard use. Most remarkably, she seemed to understand each boy's individual needs and temperament, adapting her approach to bring out the best in every one of them. "Where did you learn to handle children so well?" Iron asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching his sons play in the yard, actually playing together instead of fighting for the first time in months. Clara's expression grew distant. "I taught school for 3 years back in Kansas, before." She trailed off, that familiar shadow crossing her face whenever her past came up. "Before what?" Iron asked gently. Clara was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Before I married a man who turned out to be a monster." The story came out in pieces over the following days, each revelation making Iron's protective instincts burn hotter. Clara had been an educated woman from a respectable family, working as a schoolteacher in a small Kansas town when she met and married Dr. Edward Henderson, a man who seemed like the perfect husband, educated, successful, charming in public. But behind closed doors, Dr. Henderson had revealed himself to be a man who believed his medical degree and social position gave him the right to treat his wife like property. He controlled every aspect of Clara's life, from what she wore to whom she spoke to, using his reputation in the community to ensure that no one would believe her if she tried to report his increasingly violent behavior. "He said I was his experiment," Clara explained, her hands shaking as she rolled pie dough with more force than necessary. "He wanted to see how much pain the human spirit could endure before it broke completely. He documented everything, my injuries, my reactions, my attempts to escape, like I was a laboratory animal." Iron's jaw clenched as he listened, his own hands forming fists that he had to consciously relax. "How did you get away?" "He made a mistake," Clara said, a ghost of fierce satisfaction in her voice. He told me he was planning to perform surgery on me, unnecessary surgery that would have left me unable to have children, said it was for my own good, that I was too mentally unstable to be a proper mother. She looked up at Iron, her pale eyes blazing with determination. That's when I knew I had to run, no matter what it cost me. I waited until he left for a medical conference, took what money I could find, and started walking west. I've been moving ever since, staying ahead of the Pinkerton detectives he hired to find me. Wait, don't miss this crucial detail. The confrontation with Dr. Henderson came exactly 3 weeks after Clara's arrival at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Iron had been expecting it. A man like Henderson wouldn't simply let his property disappear without making every effort to reclaim it. Henderson arrived with a territorial marshal and 2 hired gunmen, riding into the ranch yard with the confidence of someone accustomed to using legal authority and social position to get what he wanted. He was a tall, thin man in an expensive Eastern suit, his pale hair perfectly groomed and his cold gray eyes holding the kind of clinical detachment that made Iron's skin crawl. "Mr. Sullivan," Henderson called out, his voice carrying the affected accent of someone trying to sound more educated than his background warranted. "I believe you're harboring my wife. I've come to bring her home." Iron stepped off his porch, his massive frame dwarfing the smaller man despite Henderson's mounted advantage. Behind him, his 4 boys lined up like young soldiers, their faces set with the loyalty of children who had found something worth protecting. "I see a woman who asked for shelter and 4 boys who've come to care about her," Iron replied calmly. "I don't see anyone here who belongs to you." Henderson's smile was cold as winter. "I have legal documents proving Clara is my wife, along with medical records showing her history of mental instability and violent episodes. She's clearly had another breakdown and needs to be returned to medical care immediately." "That's a lie," Clara's voice rang out as she emerged from the house, her chin raised in defiance despite the obvious fear in her eyes. "I was never violent, never unstable. You made me sick with your experiments and cruelty, but I'm not crazy." Henderson's mask of professional concern slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold fury beneath. "Clara, darling, you're obviously not thinking clearly. These frontier people have filled your head with nonsense. Come home with me now, and we can forget this unfortunate episode ever happened." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Clara said firmly. "I'd rather die first." Henderson turned to the territorial marshal. "As you can see, she's completely irrational. I'll need you to place her in custody for her own protection." That's when Iron stepped forward, positioning himself between Henderson and Clara with the unmistakable body language of a man prepared to fight. "What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what happens next." "Marshal," Iron said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had never backed down from a fight in his life. "Before you do anything official, you might want to take a look at this woman's condition when she arrived here 3 weeks ago." He gestured toward Clara, who had filled out considerably since her arrival, but still bore the marks of prolonged abuse, fading bruises, scars from medical procedures, and the nervous habits of someone who had learned to fear sudden movements. She came here half-starved, terrified of her own shadow, and covered in injuries that sure don't look like they came from any mental breakdown, Iron continued. "She's been nothing but helpful and gentle with my boys, showing more patience and kindness than most folks manage on their best days." The marshal, a weathered man named Tom Briggs who had seen enough of life to recognize truth when he heard it, studied Clara with growing concern. "Ma'am, are you here against your will?" "No, sir," Clara replied clearly. "I'm here because Mr. Sullivan offered me shelter when I needed it most. I'm grateful for his kindness, and I've tried to repay it by helping with his children and household. I have no desire to return to Kansas or to my husband." Henderson's face darkened with rage. "She's my legal property. I have rights." "The only right you have," Iron interrupted, his voice gaining an edge that made Henderson's hired guns shift nervously in their saddles, "is to leave my property before I decide you're threatening my family." The word family hung in the air between them, carrying implications that surprised even Iron himself. But as he looked at Clara standing beside his 4 sons, all of them united in their determination to protect her, he realized it was true. Somehow, in just 3 weeks, this damaged woman had become part of their family in ways that went deeper than blood or legal documents. Henderson made one last desperate play. "I'll pay you for her return. Name your price. I have substantial resources." Iron's laugh was harsh and humorless. "There isn't enough gold in Colorado to make me hand over someone who's found sanctuary under my roof." Marshal Briggs had seen enough. "Dr. Henderson, I suggest you head back to Kansas. The lady has made her choice clear, and she appears to be in good health and sound mind. I don't see any grounds for forcing her to go anywhere against her will." As Henderson and his men rode away, defeated and furious, Clara collapsed against the porch railing, her strength finally giving out after weeks of fear and uncertainty. Iron was beside her in an instant, his strong arms offering support without demanding anything in return. "It's over," he said quietly. "You're safe now. You're home." And that's when the most incredible transformation began. The wedding took place 6 months later, after Clara had had time to heal from her traumatic marriage, and Iron had had time to court her properly. It was a simple ceremony performed by the traveling preacher who made his rounds through the Wyoming territory, but it was filled with the kind of joy that made everyone present believe in the power of love to triumph over the worst circumstances. James, now 13 and showing signs of the fine young man he would become, served as Iron's best man. Samuel read a poem he had written especially for the occasion, his stutter barely noticeable as his confidence had grown under Clara's patient encouragement. Thomas surprised everyone by singing a hymn in a clear, strong voice, while little Benjamin scattered wildflower petals and announced to everyone within earshot that he now had a mama who could make pancakes and knew all the best bedtime stories. Clara had sewn her own wedding dress from fabric. Iron bought her in town, simple blue calico that made her eyes shine like sapphires and marked her transformation from the broken woman who had hidden in his barn to the confident, beloved wife and mother she had become. Years passed, and the Broken Arrow Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place where families thrived and children grew up strong and confident. Clara and Iron had 2 children of their own, a daughter who inherited her mother's gentle strength and a son who had his father's steady determination. But they loved all 6 children equally, creating a family bound not by blood alone but by choice, commitment, and unwavering devotion. The boys grew up to become respected men in their community, carrying with them the lessons Clara had taught them about treating others with kindness and standing up for those who couldn't protect themselves. They remembered the woman who had hidden in their barn and become their salvation, and they made sure their own children understood that family was built on love rather than law, on protection rather than possession. The woman who had fled her husband's cruelty became the foundation upon which a new generation built their understanding of what marriage and family could be. Not a prison for the powerless, but a sanctuary where love could flourish and damaged souls could find healing. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with simple acts of kindness and that families are built on choice rather than chance, then you've found your home. Subscribe to Wild West Romance Stories for more tales of healing, hope, and love that emerges from the ashes of broken dreams. From ranch sanctuaries to chosen families, every story we tell proves that the strongest bonds are forged not in perfection, but in the patient work of helping each other become whole. This is where wounded hearts learn to trust again and where love creates families that flourish against all odds.